Hey y'all, welcome back to Candle Crimetime. My name is Shanta and I'm going to be shedding a light on real stories that should never be forgotten. Today's case is a heartbreaking, disturbing, and tragic reminder of the deep racial tensions that still haunts our society. We're going to be traveling back in time to April 1987 in Nashville, Tennessee to talk about the brutal murder of 14-year-old Kerrick Majors, a young black boy whose life was stolen in an act of unimaginable cruelty and hate. Viewer discretion is advised. This story does feature racial issues, cruelty to children, and the brutal details of murder. Kerrick's story will not be easy to hear, however, it is important that we listen. Now, let's tell Kerrick's story. To really understand the weight of this case, we first have to talk about what Nashville was like for black people in the 1980s. Nashville has been long seen as a city of music, education, and Southern charm. But beneath the surface, especially for black residents, it was the city still grappling with the deep-rooted racial inequality. In the 1980s, many black families lived in neighborhoods that were historically underfunded, underserved, and overpoliced. Economic opportunities were limited, and segregation, though no longer legal, it still shaped where people lived, worked, and went to school. Black children often attended under-resourced schools and faced systemic barriers that made upward mobility a constant struggle. Police-community relations were tense. Many black residents distrusted law enforcement, a common thing with black folks in the police forces of their time and their cities. And for good reason. Complaints of slow response times, the all too familiar excessive force, and just blatant disregard for black victims were common, and in some cases, life-threatening. This was a time when black families had to fight to be seen, to be heard, and even to be protected, not just from crime, but for the very systems that were supposed to serve them. And it was this environment where a black child could go missing and police wouldn't even start a proper search, in which would be a crucial point in Kerrick's story. I wasn't able to find much about Kerrick's upbringing while researching this case, but what I do know is that he was born on December 22nd, 1972 in Nashville, Tennessee. It appears as he was raised by his mother and father in later research. However, his mother is a major component of his story. On the evening of Sunday, April 26, 1987, Kerrick Majors and about 2 or 3 of his friends were walking alongside Gallatin Road in East Nashville. My apologies for you natives of Nashville. I am not familiar with your streets and roads. They were just children doing what kids do, hanging out and exploring. The boys stumbled upon a table with random items from a makeshift flea market that belonged to 3 white individuals, 24-year-old Donald Ray Middlebrooks, his then 17-year-old wife Tammy, and their then 16-year-old runaway friend Robert Brewington Jr. All 3 of them were homeless at this time, and they had set up a flea market to help sell their belongings, obviously for cash. As Kerrick and his friends got close to the table, Tammy immediately yelled at them to get away, back off. And in the midst of the chaos, a vase got knocked over and broke. This vase was worth, at most, $2. Once this vase was broken, that's when pretty much all hell broke loose. The children started to run after the vase broke. However, 2 of his friends got away, but Kerrick didn't get away. It is important to note that Kerrick and his friends are black and the trio are white. The trio chased the boys down and caught Kerrick. Brewington wrapped his arms around Kerrick's head and neck, and then when Kerrick resisted, racial slurs were hurled at him, including the N-word. 2 of his friends watched helplessly as Kerrick was dragged to the back of the table and punched in the face by Middlebrooks. Later that night, After the boys continued to run and made it home, one of Kerrick's friends told Kerrick's mother what happened. His mother's name is Deborah. Deborah immediately called the police, but that call, the one that should have, could have, and would have saved Kerrick, didn't lead to any real action. Kerrick was taken to a wooded area behind a nearby drugstore where, unfortunately, a nightmare continued. Kerrick was tied up, they stripped him naked, and he was beaten and tortured for hours, including being hit with sticks, brass knuckles. He was urinated on by Middlebrooks and Brewington. They burned him with a cigarette lighter, carved an X into his chest, and ultimately, Kerrick was stabbed twice in the chest. Again, Kerrick was only 14 years old. When Deborah called the police and they came out to hear her out, the police did almost nothing. Yes, they came and took a missing persons report, but they immediately left. The responding officer's supervisor didn't come out to the scene. Law enforcement did not interview Kerrick's friends who had literally witnessed the abduction and could explain what happened and led up to this so they could go to the scene. Nothing. Nothing at all happened. Law enforcement immediately failed Kerrick. Despite department policy, no search was initiated to help find Kerrick. At this time, he was a minor, so he should have been looked for almost immediately. The very next day, Deborah tried again. She went to juvenile court to see if she can file a missing persons report or to see what options she had. And there, she was told that her son was likely a runaway. And because he was a runaway, no one would be able to help her. No one was available. So, despite this, Kerrick's family went to search and look for him on their own. His family, the friends that were there with him, and anyone else who knew Kendrick and wanted to help. And unfortunately, later that afternoon, around 3:30 p.m., Kerrick's mutilated body was found under a discarded mattress at a dry creek bed. He was naked, bruised, burned, carved up with that X that was carved on his chest, stabbed, and just gone. There was also a bloody stick found laying near Kerrick's head. An autopsy later determined that Kerrick's cause of death was a stab wound to the chest. That X that had been carved into his chest was done before his fatal stab wounds had been inflicted. The day after Kerrick's body was found, in the early hours of April 28th, police met up with Mr. Brewington at a donut shop after Mr. Brewington called them and asked to meet them there. Once the police arrived, Brewington voluntarily informed them that Donald and Tammy Middlebrooks were involved in the murder of Kerrick. However, of course, he denied any involvement of it himself. He just knew about it. After this, he also directed the law enforcement officers to the location of the murder weapon, which was covered in bloodstains. And Brewington also told police where they could find Donald and Tammy. Hours later, Donald and Tammy were arrested at a shack. Of course, they both resisted arrest. Tammy tried to run but was bitten by the canine and after that, of course, arrested. And then Donald refused to leave the shack without a fight. He tried to literally bring a knife to a gunfight. With the aid of more canines, he was then taken down and was able to be arrested and was taken to a hospital for treatment of those canine bites that he received before being transported to police headquarters. Both the Middlebrooks, Tammy and Donald, and Mr. Brewington blamed the others as the instigators of the crime. Mr. Middlebrooks claimed that Brewington had killed Kerrick in a, quote, satanic ritual and had murdered him as an offering to Satan. And he also claimed that Brewington had beat, gagged, sexually molested, and stabbed Majors. He did admit to stabbing Kerrick once, though. While awaiting sentencing, Brewington was raped by another inmate. And while in prison at the Tennessee State Penitentiary, Donald Middlebrooks was also attacked by black inmates in retaliation for the crime. He also received death threats while he was there. And so, because he couldn't handle the heat of the kitchen that he was in, Donald Middlebrooks tried to fake a suicide attempt in an effort to gain protection by superficially slashing his own throat. The judge in his trial agreed to a transfer request, and after this stunt that he pulled, Donald Middlebrooks was moved from the Tennessee State Penitentiary to Metro Jail, where he awaited his impending trial date. On May 8th, 1987, the Metro Police Chief Joe Casey has suspended 2 police officers for, quote, improperly investigating the disappearance of Kerrick. One of the 2 received the harshest punishment short of termination. Sergeant Robert Graves received a suspension of 30 days without pay, and Officer Robert Swisher was suspended 20 working days without pay. Chief Casey had accused them of being lax because after Deborah had called the police, Officer Swisher was dispatched to the home, and he took a missing persons report and notified officers in the juvenile division. However, he did not initiate a search, which again, department policy required. Sergeant Graves, who was Officer Swisher's supervisor, should have headed to the scene, but he failed to do so. Remember, I did mention that a little bit earlier. Officer Swisher did not interview Kerrick's friends who were there and witnessed the kidnapping. However, Officer Casey and the assistant police chief agreed that even a proper police investigation would not have saved Kerrick's life that day, as they concluded he had been killed before the call was made, which still could have been handled a lot better, and he may have had a better chance of survival, but that's just my personal opinion. We could save that to the end. Kerrick's grandfather reacted to the suspension with disapproval. He called the punishment a, quote, slap on the wrist, and argued that the 2 officers should not have a job. As both officers were white, he claimed that they would have responded differently had Kerrick also been white. Chief Casey said both officers had assured him that their laxness was not due to racial bias. If you could see my face right now. Anywho. The very next year, April 25th, just 1 day shy of the anniversary of Kerrick's death in 1988, Kerrick's parents filed a $2 million civil damage suit against the Metro government. They asked for $1 million in compensatory damages and another $1 million in punitive damages. Kerrick's parents argued that the slow response from the Metro Police Department to Deborah's missing persons report led to Kerrick's death. Police later apologized for failing to begin a full search for Kerrick immediately after the call was made. However, they said that it appeared he had already been killed before they were even notified that he was missing. Again, according to Richard Jackson, who was Kerrick's family's attorney, an autopsy report prepared by the Metro Medical Examiner showed that Kerrick had died sometime after his mother had called the police for help. Robert Brewington's trial was first, and on June 22, 1988, he was found guilty of the kidnapping, robbery, and murder of Kerrick Majors. He was also convicted of the other charges, which included first-degree murder, which carried an automatic life sentence. During his trial, Robert Brewington did not take the witness stand, and on December 15, 1988, Criminal Court Judge Ann Lacey Johns had imposed the maximum possible sentence for Robert Brewington, life plus 75 years. He was also convicted of aggravated kidnapping and armed robbery. Robbery because Kerrick had on a ring and a necklace when he was kidnapped, and when he was found, both of those items were gone. Robert Brewington had shown no remorse for the killing of Kerrick, and he was only spared the death sentence because at the time of the murder, Brewington was a juvenile. On January 27, 1989, Tammy Middlebrooks had her trial, and she was sentenced to life in prison after pleading guilty to assisting in the kidnapping and killing of Kerrick. She was ordered to spend a minimum of 17 years in prison at the Tennessee Prison for Women before being eligible for parole. Like Brewington, she too was spared the death penalty simply because she was 17, a juvenile, at the time of the murder. Later on, Tammy went on to be paroled sometime after August 12, 2015. Robert Brewington has actually been eligible for parole since August 2023. However, it is not known if he had been granted parole or not at this time. In September 1989, the trial of Donald Middlebrooks began, and jury selection was held on September 11th. The prosecution had announced that they would actually be seeking the death penalty against Donald Middlebrooks. On September 19th, 1989, Donald Middlebrooks was found guilty of first-degree murder and aggravated kidnapping. However, he was charged with murder committed in the commission of a felony instead of premeditated murder, with the felony being the kidnapping. Both charges were considered first-degree murder, and it made him eligible for the death penalty. Middlebrooks' defense attorneys argued that he should be spared from the death sentence as he has a severe mental illness. Just a few days later, on September 22nd, 1989, Donald Middlebrooks was sentenced to death in the electric chair. As his sentence was announced, Middlebrooks grinned and mouthed the phrase, "Thank God." According to Middlebrooks' sister, he had been expecting a death penalty, and after the sentence was announced, Kerrick's family expressed relief at the verdict. Kerrick's brother believed that Donald Middlebrooks deserved the death penalty, and Kerrick's father, John Majors, said, quote, "I think it is one of the most fair things I've seen done in this town on behalf of a black person. Sometimes we, as blacks, do not expect justice." A key component to the prosecution strategy was to display Donald Middlebrooks as a racist and use race as the reason why he killed Kerrick. I am not going to get into the unfortunate and horrific details of what he has said to Kerrick, but I will put a link in the description box below. In 1992, Donald Middlebrooks' death sentence was overturned due to a ruling by the Tennessee Supreme Court. The ruling tightened the rules for imposing a death sentence when someone was killed during the commission of another crime, with the Kerrick Majors' case being kidnapping and murder. The Supreme Court affirmed Middlebrooks' kidnapping and felony murder convictions, but entitled him to a new sentencing hearing on the murder charge. So, in September 1995, a new hearing was scheduled for October. On October 2nd, 1995, the second trial for Middlebrooks began. And during this trial, he was portrayed as a racist, arguing the murder was a racially motivated hate crime, citing the racial slurs made towards Majors during the attack. One of Kerrick's friends who had witnessed Kerrick being grabbed heard Mr. Middlebrooks say to him, "Shut up, N-word." He also testified that he had spoken with Middlebrooks on the morning of the murder, and that Middlebrooks supposedly told him that he was a member of the KKK, hated black people, and had once punched a black man, in the face for just saying hello to him. On October 13th, 1995, Donald Middlebrooks was sentenced to death again. Donald Middlebrooks was actually supposed to be executed in 2019. However, due to COVID, it was pushed back. He then was due to be scheduled in March of 2025, but his new execution date was granted to him of September 24th, 2025, to give him time to get a federal litigation concluded. As of this video, Donald Middlebrooks remains on death row and is imprisoned at the Riverbend Maximum Security Institution awaiting execution. He is actually one of 4 prisoners who are slated to be executed in the state of Tennessee in the year 2025. Alongside him, you have Oscar Franklin Smith and Byron Lewis Black. and Harold Wayne Nichols. It appears as though Donald Ray Middlebrooks will not be executed by the electric chair, but perhaps he is going to be given the lethal injection, as the Tennessee Department of Corrections has developed a new lethal injection protocol, allowing the authorities to deploy a new single drug combination with the pentobarbital to conduct the lethal injections versus the more commonly used 3-injection protocol. And that is the tragic story of 14-year-old Kerrick Majors. I have a lot of thoughts about this case, and my first thought is this was an absolutely senseless act of violence, hatred, and racism. I unfortunately do not think that justice will be served, because if this man can keep getting stays of executions up until now, they're going to continue to play in that family's face. I do agree also with Kerrick's parents in their lawsuit, and that their negligence and lack of diligence in this case caused Kerrick to be killed. He could have been saved. He should have been saved, and he would have been saved. But because this was a white police force and a black child, they could give a crap care less. I could go on a tangent, but I'm so much more interested to hear what you have to say. Please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.